thrown at you today. So this is a very concise summary of the certification requirements between FSC and PEFC and the similarities and differences between them. I'm going to cover those across a series of topics on the screen just now, and we can discuss them further in the Q&A at the end. I think I do know most people in the room, but for those who don't know me, I'm managing our Ucadia portfolio, which covers, the easiest way to explain it is the English-speaking world plus Scandinavia. So it's a very geographically diverse portfolio. It's one of 3 portfolios of certification clients that we have in the forestry team. And as Maggie said, we have now not far off 5,000 chain of custody certificates around the world. So really good. So that I can know where all of you are, and so that you can have a stretch after lunch. Beginning with a show of hands, how many of you in the room are working for a company which is either FSC or PEFC certified? Okay, great. About half, that's what I expected. And how many are certified to both of those people who are dual? Half again, probably 2/3, maybe 3/4. And is there anyone who could be certified who's not certified right now, who may be looking to be certified?
Under both or five?
Yes.
Under both.
Who doesn't have either, but that's fine. I didn't expect any of those people to be in the room. So, like I said, I'm trying to keep this high level because all of you know these requirements, but I want to summarize them from my perspective, working from an auditing body. We all know what the certified supply chain looks like, and as you know, from the certified forest, we need an entire certified supply chain up to either the retailer or the end user for those claims to be passed on through and for the material to remain as certified. So onto the similarities to begin with. I'll start with CB accreditation. So in general, you can assume that I'm comparing PEFC with FSC here. There are other schemes available, obviously. It's an accredited scheme, so it's delivered by independent accredited certification bodies like Soil Association, with a 5-year certificate validity, annual surveillance audits, and a really important one for people to be aware of actually is that not only are the certificate details published on the database, but for forest management, the public version of the audit reports are also published, either on the FSC database for FSC or through the CB website for PEFC for accredited CBs. In terms of the requirements on the certificate holder, we have an international chain of custody standard, so that's very common. And when we talk about the quality management system, there is a large amount of overlap. So generally, the quality management system can be documented in a single set of documents or one document. And there are lots of similarities with staff responsibility, functions within the system that you might have on site or in office, including the supplier monitoring process, and as I mentioned on the last slide, the public database for verifying the validity of your suppliers. Going into a little bit more detail on those site-specific or system-specific things, you have a very common methodology for goods-in checks, delivery notes or delivery documentation of some kind. A very similar way of representing claims and codes on sales documents. You also have very similar requirements in the standard for the functionality of the material records. So your record of inputs and outputs, volumes, claims, etc. You also have 3 equivalent control systems. They're not called exactly the same, but the way that they function is, if not identical, very, very close. And an important one to mention, and this is relevant, I would imagine, to lots of your end customers in your supply chain and also to stakeholders who you might have to you might end up engaging with, is that, broadly speaking, the scheme objectives and the level of assurance that they represent are equivalent. And I'm sure some people would argue one way or another, but I think we'd all agree that they're very close. It's not that one is better than the other in certain ways. So some key differences in the requirements, and then I'm also going to try and, with each slide, explain at a high level the differences in how we audit them. So health and safety and labour rights are now inherent parts of both sets of standards. The way that they are audited and the way that the requirements describe, that in the standard is quite different between the two schemes. So for PEFC, the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work is incorporated into the standard, and there's a documentation requirement for a demonstration of commitment. And then for health and safety and for labour rights, it's audited through observations and document samples on site. I'll come on to due diligence in the next slide, but it is also represented as one of the significant risk indicators when you're talking about controlled sourcing due diligence. On to due diligence then. Unlike FSC, PEFC in the standard has a universal requirement for due diligence on all supplies. For certified inputs, then you are only implementing step 1 of that due diligence requirement. So you need to know what you're buying and who you're buying it from, in short. And then the step 2, step 3, risk assessment, risk mitigation is a much more flexible system under PEFC. It's not as prescriptive as the controlled route due diligence system and the associated risk assessments and all of that kind of stuff. Those controlled route risk assessments can be very useful material for PEFC certified companies. They can incorporate them into their PEFC due diligence system if they want to, but that's not the only source of information or the only risk assessment that they can adapt into their due diligence. The other one I've highlighted in bold at the bottom is that for PEFC controlled sources, there is recognition of materials certified to other schemes such as FSC. So that can automatically be accepted as controlled sources into PEFC product groups. Volume records. I did say that there was similarities between the material records, but the way that you present those and the way that we audit them differ. So there is no explicit requirement in the PEFC standard to produce a volume summary. And those of you who are FSC certified will know what needs to be shown in that volume summary. And depending on companies' systems, it can be a difficult document to produce. It can have, incorrect information in it, or it can just be a labor-intensive thing to do. And that's not an explicit requirement in the PEFC standard. The records are very similar. So you're recording things like your supplier, the input date and volume, your conversion factors, your output date and volume, etc. This might not be true for everyone, but it's certainly true for the way that I audit, is I will be assessing that as a functionality of the system. I'm not looking for you to produce a material accounting record as a fixed document that lists all these things in columns and rows. I'm looking that your management information system or whatever software you use, or whether it's a spreadsheet or a filing cabinet, can show me the right information, cross-referenceable and retrievable as requested. Another important one to say here, in terms of making sales and making claims on those sales of certified products, the PEFC certified organization can define where those sales should appear and which document confirms the status of that sale. So it could be the delivery note, it could be the invoice, it could be both, or it could be something completely different. And again, the way that that's covered in the standard is different from FSC. Okay, I think this is an important one for people in the room, potentially. The credit method under PEFC is, in short, more flexible. You can attribute your credit balance to outputs at a lower than 100% volume percentage. That's one way of saying it. I can try and say it a couple of other different ways if people don't understand, but effectively, you can sell 10 units at 70% and only deduct 7 units from your credit account. Whereas if this was an FSC system, if you wanted to sell those 10 units, you would need to deduct 10 units from your credit account. So you can stretch that a little bit further. And internal auditing. So internal auditing is another universal requirement, and there's a familiar face there in a grey hard hat. Another universal requirement in the PEFC chain of custody standard. So all certificate types, whether they are a single site or a multi-site or anything else, will need to conduct an annual internal audit and a management review of the results of that audit for their system. It also applies, and again this is an important one, to outsourced activities prior to commencement of a new outsourcer and annually thereafter. John mentioned the guidance document earlier, and so I wanted to highlight this in the slides because, again, it's a different way of implementing guidance and non-normative documentation in the system compared to FSC. I certainly find the GD 2001 very useful. It's available through the PEFC International website, and it's probably linked elsewhere on PEFC UK, PEFC Ireland, things like that.
Can I just say it's about 5 or 6 months out of date. There's a lot of guidance to be uploaded, and next month we're starting a project to digitalise it so it will become an interactive website. So by the end of this year, you will appreciate that guidance document in a different way.
Excellent. It'll become even more alive, so to
Correct.
speak. Yeah. Great. So that's one thing to highlight, another difference. We also have a different way in the standard of wording non-conformity, non-conforming products, and other phrases that some of you might be familiar with from FSC. So there is a universal requirement for addressing non-conformity. You can find it in 4.8 if you want to go and read it. And that can be applied by a PEFC certified organization to internal audit findings, external audit findings, non-conforming deliveries, complaints, anything they like in theory. And again, it's a very kind of generic requirement in the standard that's then applicable in a flexible way to different scenarios. And finally, the no placement on the market requirement. Again, you can go and read Appendix 1 if you want to. I'm not going to read the whole thing out here. But the important one is highlighted in bold at the bottom. So the company must exclude illegal material from their placement on the market, whether it is inside or outside of their certified scope. So if you have multiple sites, some of them certified, some of them not, then this requirement extends to those sites and effectively asks you to perform due diligence and make sure there's no illegality occurring in the material being traded through those sites. That's me. Thank you, everyone.
Just one
Go for it.
point. Just clarifying sales of PFC controlled sources and the difference between sales of FSC controlled wood.
Of course.
And for FSC controlled wood, obviously if you're selling FSC controlled, you can only sell it to a certified company. With the sale of PFC controlled sources, that's not the case. You can sell it to anybody, regardless of their certified status. So that's one.
Great. Thanks for reminding me.
Sorry.
All right. Good. Q&A next. Is that right?
Yeah.